It's my pleasure to introduce Hugh Segal now. Our practice at this event has been to avoid lengthy introductions and to point you to the biographies in the program, which is a good thing because Hugh Segal is so accomplished that we might be here until lunch if I read his entire biography. But I'll draw attention to two elements. One is that he will become the 5th Master of Massey College at the University of Toronto in July, which I think was an inspired appointment by Massey and by the University of Toronto. And the second, and probably the most important element of his biography, is that he is a graduate of the University of Ottawa. So, welcome back to the University of Ottawa. Congratulations on your new appointment, and please welcome Senator Segal.
It's a great privilege to be back at the University of Ottawa. Any time spent on campus is good for the soul. I am reminded, however, that when I was on campus, this actual territory on which we now stand were a series of World War II shacks arrayed together in a long line purporting to be the Faculty of Science. Not social science, hard science. And so things have improved. When I was a student at this institution, when we talked about poverty and poor plumbing and people who lived in difficult conditions, we didn't have to really take a hard, long, far look because they were the folks next door in one of those gray buildings on Laurier Street. In a room with the former Prime Minister and former Ministers of Foreign Affairs, distinguished ambassadors, former public servants, and folks who have had a much more granular engagement with serious foreign policy establishments, not to mention the new president of the Trudeau Foundation, who I'm glad to see here. Morris, welcome and congratulations. I should tell you, your office, this offends me deeply because my office of the IRPP had none of the above. Your office has a working fireplace. Not anymore. You already done away with that. Those foreign affairs guys, they just cut. It's amazing. So I will be careful in terms of purporting to have expertise I don't have. Or experience which I really would be less than frank about, but I will share some of the perspectives which I think will define the challenges we face and the choices we need to make in an organized way with respect to foreign policy and our own domestic interests. I think there will be 3 unbendable and defining conditions for the success of our country's foreign policy, accepting for a moment at least that success is the right description for an acceptable range of outcomes. This success will hinge firstly on legitimacy of foreign policy, goals and purposes. The choice and effectiveness of the instrumentality employed in their pursuit is the second critical issue, and the resilience and determination behind those paths that are chosen. Summertime soldiers and fair-weather patriots had best stay out of the game. The lessons of Ukraine and Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and the rather optimistically labeled Arab Spring are not in any way ambivalent. Engagement without resilience, rhetoric without deployability, unbridled optimism about all change being good are both naive and uncalled for. And it's clear that while history may teach some clear principles around strategy and tactics, it does not, nor can it, give us any prediction of value with respect to outcomes. Foreign policy challenges of the future, in my view, will be defined more as crises and violence within states as opposed to between them. Whether it is an overlay of water source maps or tribal customs and grazing territories in Africa, or ethnic, linguistic, and historic settlement patterns in Eastern Europe, or more ominously, a better understanding of Russian Arctic aspirations, or Chinese mineral and resource requirements outside its own borders, foreign policy contingency plans, alliance exigencies, and domestic planning will reach well beyond the nation state. History, Malthusian logic, and ethnicity will always matter. For a middle power like Canada, with modest military capacity, due to decades of governments who felt we didn't really need substantial military capacity, both political parties fall into that happy category, means that dealing with these issues in terms of appropriate instrumentality will not be easy. We need to think about our chosen instruments in new ways, part of what I think this conference is about. The unipolar Pax Americana, the so-called New World Order, anticipated if not heralded after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Gulf War #1, has passed like a chimera in a desert sunset. While all the poles in the multipolar world may not be equal in length or width, Russia, China, the United States, and their respective partners or clients are once again poised in competition with each other, if not yet in outright opposition. What we are facing is not a Cold War in the pre-1990 sense, but a potential collision derby, where accidents, miscalculations, and excesses of testosterone or failure of intent can be deadly, if not explosive. The Russian sphere of influence and support group going forward will not be defined, in my view, by left-right orthodoxy or ideology, but by an authoritarian collectivism about the state, morality, religion, national pride, and both sectarian and ethnic survival, if not dominance. The Iranians, the Assad Syrians, the extended Iranian reach through Hezbollah, Hamas, and other fellow travelers constitute one team, however dissolute and measured in formal affiliation throughout the region. Insofar as state sovereignty is the cudgel collectively applied at the UN and elsewhere by China and Russia to shield any and all from the global responsibility to protect, a Canadian idea we should not desert, China will have a strategic sympathy for that position, but always be on its own team and never on anybody else's. The other polarity, shaped for better or worse amid free markets and self-determination, democracy, rule of law, a more liberal tolerance and respect for both freedom, lifestyle, and cultural pluralism, will define the United States, the United Kingdom, the EU, Israel, Japan, Canada, India, and their relative networks and partnerships, including places like South Korea. Geopolitics, trade, and mutual defense agreements will be key linkages for all the main actors. Despite their relative non-democratic moorings, Sunni Gulf states and Arab countries will prefer to work with this American-led network. Central and South America, notwithstanding Cuba and Venezuela, will prefer the network led from within their own hemisphere. In Africa, the dynamics of Chinese investment and France's continuing influence and networks will matter most, as will the trajectory of extractive industries, both in terms of social responsibility and the level of genuine local benefit and empowerment and aid derived from that broad presence, an issue of great concern and opportunity for Canada. For Canada, the only possible way to advance our national interests, protect our global aspirations around trade, democracy, stability, and help shape a world where our values of democracy, rule of law, freedom, and equality of opportunity, shared by many, can survive and flourish is by deploying our diplomatic, aid, intelligence, multinational, and military capacities in support of a new balance. This is not so much a balance between polarities, but between the forces that shape the emerging reality. Our support for forces of pluralism, democracy, and basic freedoms in parts of the world where they can sometimes be at risk must be deepened, from Sri Lanka to the Ukraine, from Iran to Malaysia. Organizations that work for greater progress on these fronts through nonviolent means must receive more determined Canadian assistance and support. When organizations like the Commonwealth of Nations sadly demur and step away from their part of this fight that should defend minorities and expel or suspend oppressive member governments, Canada should broadly reallocate dollars that would normally go to the Secretariat to other organizations who really do fight for Commonwealth values. Organizations like the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative in Delhi, the South African Human Rights Foundation, the Commonwealth of Learning in Vancouver, the Rampow Foundation, the Commonwealth Study Conference. These are all engaged in real work around human rights, religious freedom, economic progress, and innovation for development and democracy, and an end to the oppressor's impunity within the 53-nation, 2.4 billion Commonwealth of Nations. This would be a strengthening initiative in support of our values and interests looking ahead. Reaching out and building alliances with organizations like Safer World in the UK, the Carter Center in Atlanta, or Sisters of Islam in Malaysia, would also aid leverage and street impact to Canada's aid dollars. Giving money to corrupt governments or governments that forcefully recriminalize sexual orientation is surely contrary to who we are and that in which we believe. A Canadian Democratic Institute aimed at promoting democratic technical and institutional support for emerging and strengthening democracies would be an important step ahead that could work alongside the Institute for Democratic and Electoral Assistance, which Canada is a founding member, in Stockholm. Because one effort tried early in a minority government on this front was insufficiently well prepared to survive cabinet questioning, is absolutely no reason to let the idea die. Canadians are deployed by Republicans International, by the Democratic International Organization, all around the world, because they're in demand and do great work. The notion they can't do it as part of a Canadian organization is, in my view, a travesty. Canada's support for what the UN does outside the Security Council should be more sustained. Recently issued calls by Minister Paradis for proposals on the International Youth Internship Program, the International Aboriginal Youth Internships, the Volunteer Cooperation Program make eminent good sense. The recent MOU signed with the Aga Khan Foundation is a superb step ahead, allowing Canada a dynamic partnership throughout the developing world with a deeply respected, well-run, and carefully calibrated organization in the forefront of health, education, and development investment alongside the private and cooperative sector. So too is the Joint Development Cooperation Protocol signed with the United Arab Emirates, an important step to deepening our relationship with the sources of light and real development opportunity throughout the Arab and Islamic world. And in terms of deployability, in support of our values and interests, while having the capacity to deploy vital land, air, naval forces is essential and must be ramped up, so too must we radically increase our special forces capacity for the range of challenges like Syria, the Ukraine, Nigeria, and other events now unknowable that will unavoidably present themselves. Anything less, in naval terms, than 4 multi-ship naval task forces worldwide, plus the 30-ship platform necessary for our own coastal defense, 3 oceans, would be an abdication of the importance of deployability within any balanced and measured foreign policy framework. Making the rhetoric against Russian adventurism in Ukraine real should, for example, see Canada lead a NATO-wide engagement with France over the planned sale of Mistral military supply and logistics ships to Russia. These ships, which are of the latest and most advanced design, can carry fuel, combat troops, substantial medical facilities, armored vehicles, and attack helicopters. Canada or NATO should buy these ships from France, leaving the Russians to await a further slot on the list which good behavior on their part could assure. Being silent, as French technology is afforded to an adventurous Russian military stance, makes no sense at all. France's rhetoric has been admirably focused and well targeted over Crimea. We should call our allies' attention to the perils of muscular hypocrisy when lives are at stake. A multivariate instrumentality in support of our values and interest-based foreign policy has never mattered more. I do not see, as many of our distinguished former practitioners of Canadian diplomacy, perhaps even some present, may see, any conflict whatever between a clearly stated foreign policy values framework on the one hand, in places like the Middle East or Sri Lanka, or on Russian adventurism in the eastern reaches of Europe, and a nuanced instrumental approach to networking, intelligence, diplomacy, and deployability on the other. What we must not do on this front, as we were warned many years ago by Dr. Dennis Stairs, distinguished foreign policy academic, emeritus professor at Dalhousie, is to, quote, talk loudly and carry a bent twig, close quote. I should like to add regarding Canada's foreign policy, and this is a bias I bring from my service as Canada's Special Envoy to the Commonwealth, but I think our current Minister, John Baird, no minister is perfect, has done more to advance Canadian values, broaden our relationship with the Gulf states, and build new linkages in Asia and Africa than many of his predecessors, and has had license to do so from the Prime Minister. Achieving our foreign policy goals will require ingenuity, new networks, fresh ideas, real deployability, and the new instruments of influence for a new age: digital, diplomatic, military, aid, and network-based. We will have to put our money where our mouth is, or what we say or care about will simply not matter. Which means that foreign policy is an opportunity, not a problem, unless we underfund the instruments vital to its success, which, like any abdication of responsibility, can turn opportunity into an unnecessary area of setback and frustration with genuine risks to our legitimate domestic interests. Thankfully, there are no time for questions or personal attacks. Thank you for bearing with me, and good luck with the rest of the conference. Thank you.